All right, I'm back. Back to talk about the dark night of the soul. And this is an experience you have after you've had a spiritual awakening. When that old persona, that the image of you that you projected out to the world is no longer present. And you're having to come to grips with that and then go through that reconstruction phase of your psyche, because you still have to interact with this world. And that process can take a while. And at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about the world and kind of why that is. It kind of gets back to the caterpillar and the butterfly. But this period, I mentioned it before in the videos, Paul had an experience on the road to Damascus where he had that blinding light, fell off his horse, became blind, and blind for 3 days. And I think that's synonymous with John chapter 9, where you say we see, you have to become blind again. Paul became blind. And then 3 days later, the scales of Leviathan, I think they're the scales of Leviathan, fell off. That old persona fell off, and he could see, he was awakened, he came to consciousness. But then he scuttled off for 3 years. And I believe that's symbolic of the dark night of the soul, because it does take a lot of time. I think I'm 3-4 years into it. Now I'm in the place where I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to interact with the world. I mean, I'm really close, but it's taken a while. And what I feel like I would do, I'm just going to go to my book, and this is the first book that I wrote. And in it, I documented everything that I went through with journal entries. And I want to read the one that I wrote for the Dark Night of the Soul in here. And this channel is precipitated by this book. It's released, it's currently available. I think the press release is going out any day. It may have already gone out. From Genesis to Revelation, the story you find yourself in. And I went to the Bible to find out, is my story in here? And I found it in the esoteric connections between Genesis and Revelation. It's all about the psychology of man and the journey that we take. Just truly understand what I'm talking about here. Those first 7 videos of this channel are meant to be read sequentially, and they'll walk you through kind of the overview of the construct of that book, but also what that journey is and what the Bible has to say about it. But I'm just going to read. It's a lot of reading. Just if you're interested, you'll listen. If not, you can turn it off. So it's titled, My Personal Story, Dark Night of the Soul, Seeking Closure. The evolution of the soul, even though liberating and necessary towards realizing the ultimate goal of salvation, is a disruptive process requiring a transformation of the mind. During this period of adjustment, the psyche will continue to seek the familiar and resist this new state of awareness. There are times that are downright euphoric where you get to catch your breath with thoughts of, I've made it through. During those times of abject feelings of depression where all you want to do is be alone and for it to be over. It truly is the dark night of the soul that simply requires perseverance on your part and understanding from those that love and care about you. The song Dark Night of the Soul by Van Morrison captures that feeling for me. One set of lyrics goes like this: sitting here, but I didn't plan it this way. Well, the plans of mice and men have gone astray. Now I'm standing on the landing and I'm looking for a brand new day. The holiday seasons have been especially challenged since 2013. Much of this history will be covered in part 2 to follow. That's where I'm going to talk about the midlife crisis, the events that led up to the actual event. But there was patterns of behavior that certainly exhibited themselves early on that I just was not aware of. I'm still living in Elsie's place and head out when his family congregates for their holiday celebrations. It's awkward, even though they've been exceptionally loving and mindful of my situation. Most times I trade places and stay in their Austin apartment while they are in Houston. I'll be moving out after the new year. As Thanksgiving approached, I was nearing the end of writing the story you find yourself in, part 1, and felt a sense of anxiousness to complete it so I could deliver it to my boys before Christmas. That was my original goal. It's been a strange year for everybody, considering the resurgent COVID-19 restrictions and our politically polarized environment. There hasn't been a great deal of communication with anyone, as I'm feeling numbed by it all, and found myself with no Thanksgiving Day plans. I've been non-responsive to those who do reach out and find myself avoiding any socially interactive setting, totally protecting my own energy. This was telling me that I'm still navigating through the dark night of the soul, even though I'm feeling like I'm close to the end. I was wrong. It's a strange feeling for sure, considering how socially active I once was. I'm just not ready, but understand that I have to learn how to exist in this world, seeing things so differently. It's not yet comfortable moving about and feeling the things that I'm observing. The clarity of seeing how superficially my former self moved through life has caused me to unintentionally pick up on the pain others are experiencing as they deal with their reality. I wished it weren't so. On the other hand, it's very rare to find someone that can comprehend what I'm going through without sounding like I've lost my mind. Perhaps I have. Only time will tell. What is true for me is I'm seeing things through another lens, one that has expanded my periphery view of what's going on around me like I'm looking through a magnifying glass. I cannot see it. I cannot not see it. It's another form of torment. To see and feel the pain, the anguish that this society has produced, so I avoid it for now. So now I find myself driving west to Austin on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving 2020, while thinking that I sure do miss the traditional drive east to Orange for red beans and a golf match with my dad. I'm wiping the tears from my face as I listen to Van Morrison's Dark Night of the Soul and check out my phone. I noticed a new Instagram posting from Dr. Nicole LePera, the holistic psychologist, about her Dark Night of the Soul experience. It was a surreal moment, as this was going to be the last section of part 1 and what I had planned on penning while I was in Austin over the Thanksgiving weekend. Synchronicity? ? Her work has been instrumental in helping me with my own healing process. One of the objectives of this effort is to unwind my own religious conditioning while honing in on what my reconstructed belief system was going to look like. It's a dicey proposition for a licensed psychologist to venture into this area, and I wanted to find that interconnect that may help others to answer their own questions regarding the Bible and spirituality. As I've said earlier, I'm not viewing this as an exercise that's made me more spiritual, but instead a process of unlearning the conditioning that has hidden from me the true nature of who I am. The weather was beautiful on Thanksgiving Day, and I headed down to my favorite spot on Lake Travis to write this section. What follows is some of what came to me as I was sitting on my tailgate, listening to Spotify's Van Morrison radio station, drinking some cold beverages, while looking out over a serene Lake Travis. I start to ponder, and I write the following. So this is unedited, just right off of what I wrote down on sitting on my tailgate. Have you ever seen a turtle flipped over on the back side of its shell, its long neck outstretched, and those stubby legs flailing about looking for the familiar, the ground? Just looking for something to connect with to get right side up. Observing that predicament, you wonder of the futility. How the hell could that little buddy ever flip over without some help? All the while you're thinking, how did you get like this in the first place? Then you reach down and give it a slight nudge, expecting it to scurry off right away. But it doesn't. Nope. It just stays there for a long moment, gaining its bearings, I suppose. You can imagine it sitting there contemplating the same thing as you. What just happened? How did I end up on my back? How can I see to it to never be that vulnerable again? How long that moment can last, I reckon, depends on just how disoriented you are. How long was that little guy on his back? Then it takes that first step, not sure if it can trust, if you're not going to flip it back over. Then it starts to move on, never to forget that experience. Losing your own narrative is like that. It's unsettling. Relearning how to trust yourself in relationships when you were conditioned that love was conditional, directly connected to accomplishment and your ability to excel. Even your love for self was conditional. Failure resulted in a form of self-hate. Coming to a resolution on how to reconcile those failures and the struggle to rebuild a reliable foundation when you don't know what that should look like or feel like is a confusion that haunts you. It includes some embarrassment, some shame, some fear. For who of those that know me can come alongside and truly understand what you're going through? Who can you share this with? Then deep down you're realizing that your life has fundamentally changed. You see things upside down from where you once were. You realize that it's not all that safe to share it. It's lonely. It's a quiet journey other than what's going on inside your mind. It's flipped over on its back, fighting for that something familiar. You wish for it to stop, but you know that's not what you want. You want truth. And that's painful. Stop but don't stop is oscillating between my ears. See, I've never been able to read this without choking up. I'll stop. Well, Stu, that's awfully dramatic, don't you think? Well, I guess it could be. But boy, oh boy, I was in it deep and bewildered at how effectively I was operating, totally unconscious to the workings of these conditional characteristics. It's like having behind-the-scenes software with subroutines running that you've built to never need maintenance. They just keep on processing in a do loop, over and over and over. I've had an onion to peel back, akin to hunting down these many interrelated toxic subroutines embedded behind firewalls. It, capital IT, that's this guy in me, had locked them under layers of coping mechanisms and didn't want me to find them, initially for helpful motives and now for selfish reasons. There were lots of internally generated fears and anxieties to contend with along the way. That vulnerability feels so much like humiliation, fumbling around in the dark, trying to run away from it. And that's the fear that manifests and led me to this place. I've come to realize that the purpose of our learning and evolving is designed to address these false fears originating from the natural body and for us to move beyond them. As we are told by Paul that we are sons of God, that there is no place for fear, and that fear is the mechanism the natural body uses to maintain control and keep us from recognizing our true nature, our divine sonship. It's in this context that Paul is telling us that we haven't adopted a spirit of slavery leading to fear again. I'm emotionally exhausted because of it. My natural body's negative energy and its need for control. The need for the familiar is relentless. Yet the process, once it starts, is unstoppable. You cannot unsee what you've seen. Suppose that's the pursuit of the helper, as it's also relentless. It has been intense, this internal war. But the helper wins always. That's a truth that I can trust. It will make sure that I don't get flipped back over on my back. That's the dark night of the soul for me, my story, my timing, my journey. Like that turtle, I'm thankful for the help that I received from those that love me. For those who helped me get flipped back over on my right side. It couldn't have happened without them. There were those that vanished from sight when the troubles started. I forgive them, knowing that we all got what we bargained for, and that we're all right where we're supposed to be, or else we would be somewhere else. Sorry about that. As the song above says, there will be a brand new day. Writing all of this down has been a cathartic experience, and hopefully there's a nugget or two that the reader can hold on to. We are all in multiple stories, and there's always someone else who needs you in theirs. The last song I listened to this Thanksgiving Day was an odd one for sure. I must have listened to it 6 to 8 times back to back as the sun was fading. It reminded me of my high school days living in Canada at the southern tip of Lake Huron, where it feeds into the St. Clair River between Port Huron, Michigan, and Sarnia, Ontario. The big ships would pass through on the way to Detroit and beyond. The Edmund Fitzgerald was one of those, and it was bigger than most. While I was living there in Sarnia, it went down on Lake Superior on its way to Cleveland in 1975. Gordon Lightfoot, a Canadian, wrote a song about it. Interestingly, I picked up on an esoteric message in it. Imagine that. I had to laugh as I was listening to it on repeat. The song describes it as the pride of the American side, and it was confronted with an unexpected November storm. It was being battered about, as the song goes, and eventually went under. I could feel that. There's a refrain in it that goes like this: does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say that it made Whitefish Bay if they'd have put 15 more miles behind her. The message of hope in these lyrics that became my takeaway was that no matter the storm you're in and your situation in life, that you can always find a way to make it 15 more miles as you have no choice. It's simply the story you find yourself in. So that's the book ends. Part 1, the epilogue, I'm going to read the first section. Going back to the opening paragraph of my story, I suggested that suicide was an option that consumed my thoughts. While we all know that's not the answer, I honestly can't say for certain if it was a mere passive thought or an actual potential action thought. It was most definitely an unhealthy thought that could only lead to ruin. And here's a quote. Did you really want to die? No one commits suicide because they want to die. Then why do they do it? Because they want to stop the pain. It's Tiffany DiBartolo, How to Kill a Rock Star. Truth be told, after fully reflecting on it, I've concluded that I did actually commit a form of suicide. My self-exiled isolation was my way of exiting. Abject, absolute, extended isolation, an escape, to heal, to reconstitute a new me. Something had to go, to be carved out of me for good, forever. The journey reflected in part 1 of the story you find yourself in served to formulate a spiritual foundation as I navigated through the dark night of the soul. The word enlightened tends to suggest this process to be a euphoric one, similar to what the word nirvana would suggest. It's not like that. So, from that point on, me and my wife developed our relationship. We got married. And I began to write this book. In January of 2021, as I've told you earlier in these other videos. It took me 2 years to write it. And I kind of said, hey, when I get this book finished and it gets released, that's the end of my dark night. Even though I thought it was close at the end of that book that got released in 2020. But now we have to learn how to exist in this world. And I just wanted to say a few things about how I see this world. In the previous videos, I talked about the butterfly, caterpillar and the butterfly. The Old Testament is the caterpillar crawl. We're in the natural body. We're to experience the knowing of both good and evil. And it's by design. It's why we're here. As Jesus said, you were one when God made you in his image. Then you became two in preparation for this journey. The single consciousness, male and female. The conscious separated from the subconscious. And then your journey is to come back to one. And that's the marriage of the Lamb and the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. It's tree of life in Genesis. The goal is to partake of that tree of life. That's the whole journey. And that's the purpose of the book. That's what the book talks about. And so the caterpillar crawl is where everybody starts, and this world is what that ego self attaches to. And this world is made by those subconscious thoughts coming out of that serpent persona, which is the ego self developed. And this world changes with every thought of every person. It's a constantly evolving program, simulation, illusion, that you exist in when you're in the caterpillar crawl. And that ego persona, that ego self, is designed to interact with that world that you see, that you're in. And when you're in it, you think it's real. You think that's all there is. And that's what the caterpillar sees. He's on the ground and he's walking around and he's eating dust. And that's what Genesis says we do. We're going to eat dust all through this journey. But when you awaken, it's like all the tentacles, the connection, the web that has connected you to the world, they all get snipped. And at a 30,000 foot level, you look at it, you're the butterfly looking down where the caterpillar is, and you say, wow, I can't believe I was ever there. The caterpillar says, I can't believe I can ever be like you. And so you see the world for the construct that it is. So that's when you see these spiritual circles, and people say, oh, the world's an illusion. The part of you that interacts with the world is an illusion. Well, that's probably the best word, but it's real. You know, it's a created thing. You're a created thing, but you're designed to interact with it because you're creating it. You're a co-creator of that world out there. The collective unconsciousness has created every aspect of it, and it's continually evolving. And where the collective consciousness is sitting in a world of negativity right now, we're creating a more and more negative world. And when you can step back and see it, it's disheartening. I mean, it's you can't unsee it. It's like it's just what we do. And then when you've gone through that deconstruction and you're being, reconstituted into your spiritual nature, you have to develop that interface, and you got to get comfortable with how you're going to engage the world. Whereas when you're in that caterpillar crawl, you're really attached to all that. On this side of it, I find myself, as my wife does, and I think really everything that I see from others that have gone through something like this, I'm much more attached, I'm much more enamored with nature. And I look at nature and I'm so much more drawn to it than I ever was before, that my refuge from the world is to get into nature. And it's quiet, it's peaceful, and I can see things that I didn't used to see. And all this can sound just really crazy to those who haven't gone through it. I get it. And I'm willing to make myself vulnerable so you can hear it out of my mouth, trying to express it. And it's just really hard to find the words that for those who are still tangled up in it to understand. Because it's like I can look out and you can just see people and you can just imagine a myriad of webs connecting them to the things that they're attached to. And they're so important. But they're not. So that dark night of the soul is that whole period of reorienting yourself to engage the rest of your life and what you're going to do with it. How can you be a positive impact on others? And that's part of the reason I wrote the book. I don't have a voice. I mean, I don't have followers. I disconnected from everybody. I used to be a networking fool. I've canned all that, and now I have to, and I want to re-engage. So, purpose of these videos, I really want my grandsons to be able to watch these when they're old enough. Get to know their Papa Stu. That's it. Until next time, bye-bye.